Chad Dorman, a 32-year-old man with a quiet demeanor, was a figure of precision and control in his work as an isolator technician. His life revolved around sterile environments where every movement was deliberate and every action carefully measured. With close-cropped hair and a perpetual furrow in his brow, Chad carried an air of intense focus. His colleagues knew him as a man of few words, someone who took his responsibilities seriously, never allowing a single contaminant to breach the pristine world he maintained. Beneath the surface of his orderly life, there was a growing tension, a darkness that he kept hidden from everyone, including himself. After a deep love story and courtship, Chad and Laura Dorman married and began their life together like any typical American family living in the countryside. They were close-knit and loving, attending church regularly. Laura had a daughter from a previous marriage, Alexis, whom Chad considered his own daughter and took it upon himself to raise her as if she were his biological child. Moved by Chad's noble gesture, Laura decided to dedicate herself entirely to their future family. Chad and Laura Dorman were blessed with 3 children, Clayton, Chase, and Hunter. They were the light of the household, filling it with joy, happiness, and sometimes a bit of chaos. Laura Dorman was the heart of her family, a stay-at-home mom who dedicated herself entirely to the well-being of her children. In her early 30s, Laura had a gentle beauty, soft, expressive eyes, and a warm smile that could soothe any trouble. She had plans to homeschool her 3 young boys, wanting to provide them with an education rooted in love and tailored to their unique needs. Her teenage daughter from a previous marriage was a testament to Laura's nurturing spirit. Having grown under her careful guidance, Laura's days were filled with the rhythms of domestic life, from preparing meals to tending to scraped knees. She envisioned a life where her home would be both a classroom and a sanctuary, a place where her children could thrive under her watchful eye. Her dedication to her family was unwavering, yet there was a quiet exhaustion that sometimes crept into her eyes, a weariness from the endless demands of motherhood and the subtle, unspoken tensions in her marriage to Chad. Life in the Dorman household continued in this manner until late February 2023, when Laura began noticing changes in her husband, Chad, that she couldn't ignore. He seemed distracted, unfocused, often lost in thought, or staring blankly at the ceiling. The children's play, which had never bothered him before, now seemed to irritate him, and he no longer interacted with Alexis as he once did. Laura tried to get closer to him, making efforts to keep the house quiet when he returned home, but Chad remained distant, and his behavior only grew worse. She noticed his strange looks towards the children, and even when he played with them, there was an unsettling intensity in his gaze. Unable to remain silent any longer, Laura tried to talk to him, but Chad insisted that he was fine, that everything was okay. Laura remained quiet, but deep down, she knew her husband was going through a difficult time. He was no longer the man she married. She decided to seek help from his mother, confiding in her about Chad's strange behavior, his frequent daydreaming, and his odd looks towards the children. Chad's mother reassured Laura, promising to handle the situation. When Chad's mother confronted him, she confirmed Laura's fears. Something was indeed off about her son. His demeanor was not normal, as if he was either hiding something or thinking deeply about something. She pressed him to share what was troubling him, but Chad, a man of few words, simply said he was fine. His mother wasn't convinced and insisted he see a psychiatrist to figure out what was going on. Under his mother's insistence, Chad agreed to see a psychiatrist, but when he arrived at the clinic, he quickly left without even meeting the doctor. On the afternoon of June 14th, 2023, Chad took his 3 children out to play baseball, teaching them some tactics, as they were all passionate about the game. Afterward, they went for a walk, and that evening, when Chad and the boys returned home, they seemed happy. Chad's cheerful demeanor relieved Laura, making her feel that he was finally returning to his old self. She thought that Chad's conversation with his mother and her insistence on him seeing a doctor might have helped resolve whatever was troubling him. Though Chad hadn't spoken to her about it, Laura felt at ease that night, not realizing that this would be the last time she would see her 3 children peacefully asleep in their beds. On the morning of June 15th, the family woke up as usual, and Laura quickly prepared breakfast. Everything seemed normal, except for the strange look Chad gave her, a look she wouldn't understand until later. As the children played inside the house, the family was surprised to see Chad return home early, which was unusual. The boys were thrilled to see their father and rushed to hug him, as they always did when he came home. But Chad, who was sweating profusely, did not return their hugs. Laura asked Chad why he came home early, and he hesitantly replied that he had some work to do in the yard and felt like he needed to be there. Laura looked at him in shock and asked if he wanted some food, but he was staring at the children and didn't respond. Laura went to the kitchen, feeling that something terrifying was going on in her husband's mind. She kept an eye on Chad as he moved around the house, not knowing what to do. He didn't seem normal at all, but he hadn't done anything to justify calling for help. Laura continued to watch Chad in silence until he broke the silence, asking her where the Bible was. She asked why he needed it, but he repeated the question, asking where the Bible was. She told him it was in the library, and he quickly went there without answering her, holding it tightly and reading some verses. Laura noticed Chad gripping the Bible so hard that the veins in his hands were bulging. She tried to approach him gently, asking if he needed help. Chad gave her a strange look and hesitantly said no, then went to the bedroom. Laura followed him, trying to calm him down as she noticed his unsettling behavior. But Chad began to open the gun safe, where his Marlin caliber rifle was stored, and attempted to take it out. In a terrified voice, Laura asked, "What are you doing? You're scaring me." Chad looked at her with a sinister smile, saying, "Nothing. I'm just joking." She begged him to put the rifle away, and he did, locking it back in the safe. The couple sat in silence for a few minutes before Laura left the bedroom to finish preparing lunch for the children. While she was in the kitchen, she heard a gunshot inside the house. Rushing to see what had happened, she found her 4-year-old son, Hunter, shot twice inside the house. Laura screamed and tried to check if Hunter was still alive, but he wasn't moving. Chad was holding the Bible in one hand and the rifle in the other, screaming, "Chad knows what's right." Their oldest son, Clayton, ran to a field behind the house, with Chad chasing after him. Chad shot Clayton twice, causing the 7-year-old to fall to the ground. When Chad reached him, he found his son still alive and shot him twice more, before carrying him back to the yard. Meanwhile, Laura had called 911, screaming that her husband was killing their children before hanging up. Chad returned to the house to find Laura and Alexis trying to protect 3-year-old Chase and escape towards the fire department for help. Chad shot at them, hitting Laura's hand, causing Alexis to stand in front of him, begging him not to kill her. Chad looked at her, then grabbed Chase from her and shot him in the street in front of some bystanders, then carried the boy back to the house. Alexis ran screaming down the street towards the fire department, shouting that her stepfather was killing everyone in their house. A neighbor saw her and called 911.
911, where's your emergency? There's a girl running down the street saying that her stepfather is killing everyone in her family. It's on the corner of where there's a body shop in the fire department. Do you know what road this is?
Okay, what's your name?
Get into the fire department.
What's your name?
Do you know what road this is? Laura Lendell Road.
You said what?
It's Laura Lendell Road.
Okay, and what did the female say to you?
And she says that her stepfather is killing everybody in her house. I did. I'm on the phone with them right now.
Did she say how or what was happening?
I asked her to get in the car with me, and she said she couldn't leave her family, but I think she ran to the fire department.
So she went to the fire station. What did she look like?
She's she's probably a young teenager, probably like 16 maybe, with long blonde hair. And she has a black dog.
Did she say anything about a baby?
I don't know about no baby. She said she just couldn't leave her family. But I see a car running around. I'm sorry?
Do you see anything from the house?
So I drove down the road a little bit, so I was afraid that I was going to get shot myself since I interacted with her face to face. So I'm just about like maybe 3 houses down. But she's like waiting at the corner. I don't know what she's doing, but I kind of still see her in the corner. But I saw a car kind of came around and whipped around, so I'm not exactly sure if that's him or if he's chasing her or not. I'm sorry?
What kind of vehicle was it?
I saw it. It was like a gray. Did you see that car whip around? It's one of the fire department guys.
Okay.
I think maybe a fire department guy. It was a regular kind of Focus-looking gray car.
Okay, we have help on the way. Thank you.
Dark gray.
If you
Okay, all right.
else, call us back, okay, and steer clear of the area at this time.
Okay. They said stay it clear from the area.
Yeah, which
but I think that's the house right there.
Chad gathered the bodies of his 3 children, laying them side by side in the yard, then sat on the porch next to the rifle in a strange calm, as if nothing had happened.
Engine 33, Monroe 1.
The female that went to their house is advising that the male shot the entire family.
29137.
Where's he at?
He's shooter still on the porch.
Get him right here. You got him on the porch.
We've asked, that's the last place we've been told.
You show me your hands now! Stand up and walk towards us! Stand up now! Walk towards us! Stand up with your hands up!
We got a visual on the veil. Not showing his hands, not following commands.
Stand up now!
Still not showing hands, so we're following commands. His name is Chad Dorman. Chad Dorman.
I know, but we can't.
If people need first aid and he's not complying, you know he's a shooter, shoot him.
We gotta find cover first. We ain't no good if we ain't safe ourselves. Hey, no. We need to come from this side where we can see them. Don't take cover behind her. We see them. We're going to approach from this side. We got cover. Right here.
6 covered, 29 and 63 attack that.
We're gonna walk there right now.
Show us your hands now. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up now. Stand up. Stand up.
EMS to stage and air clear. You're going to go ahead and fly whenever any units can advise.
Get your hands up here. Cover 21. Send the air.
Those guys can confirm that there's people that need first aid, and that's the shooter who's not complying. They need to take care of the
I got it.
victims. They have to shoot at the shootout.
Man, I ain't trying to hurt nobody. I'm completely sober. Never did drugs a day
63,
in my
we're
life.
point one. Get the EMS over here.
Well, I did drugs when I quit, but I don't do drugs now. I'm sober. I'm not trying to fight you. Gatlin,
63.
get your butt inside. Gatlin, get your butt inside.
We on primary?
Now.
29, we got 3 kids
Main.
down.
3 kids down, 16 up.
Gatlin.
63, we're 21.
Knock
Have
it off.
EMS respond over here.
You're clear. They're being advised.
Robert 34, just started mass casualty response.
63, do you want them to respond to the Laurel Lindale address? Where exactly do you need them?
We're right in the front yard. What are you doing, man?
Hey, pretty copy on this.
Can I roll over? I ain't gonna hurt you. I ain't gonna hurt nobody.
You got anything on you?
No, I ain't got nothing, man. Phone, that's it. I ain't mad. I ain't nothing. Just make sure that dog don't come out. I don't think he'll bite you. Just don't reach for him and try to grab him and pet him.
All right.
He won't bite you.
What's going on, man?
Nothing. Can I stand up? It's kind of uncomfortable.
I'm gonna
I
get
ain't
you
gonna
here
do
in a
nothing. I ain't
second.
running away. You can do whatever you want with me.
Here. You the only one else inside the house?
What?
You the only one else inside the house?
Yeah.
Sit down right here.
My daughter, she ran over to the fire department.
Sit down.
It's my stepdaughter.
Put him in the cage.
Just a little.
What else do you need?
You get the wallet out of my back pocket? Shut up. You're gonna hurt me inside. Hands. Yes, sir.
Next call, I'm gonna lost right around.
Chad was quickly taken in for questioning by Detective Michael Ross. The interrogation lasted about 2.5 hours, during which Chad's statements about his motive for killing his children were inconsistent. At one point, he claimed to be a secret CIA agent. At another, he said his wife had poisoned him and that he had seen lights in the sky. During the interrogation, Chad requested a lawyer, even though he had already confessed to the police when they arrested him, saying, "Tell them I did it." The community was horrified by the shocking crime, especially since the children were very well liked. They were active, with beautiful smiles that naturally made everyone who saw them happy. The day after Chad's arrest, he appeared in court wearing a special jail uniform designed to prevent inmates from harming themselves. The judge set Chad's bail at around $20 million, which was not posted, so Chad remained in the Claremont County Jail. Chad was charged with the following: 3 counts of aggravated murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, as it was alleged that he forcibly restrained his sons before killing them. Chad was supposed to be sentenced to death, but for that to happen, Alexis and Laura needed to testify in court, which Laura and Alexis couldn't bring themselves to do. This led to Chad's lawyer and the prosecutors reaching a plea deal, where Chad would plead guilty in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. In court, both Laura and Alexis wrote letters expressing their deep sorrow over what happened. Alexis stated that she will never forgive Chad for what he did, even though she struggles to hate him because he was like a father to her. Laura mentioned that nothing can compensate for the loss of seeing her children playing on the swings again or hearing their laughter fill the house. Laura asked the community, which was boiling with anger after learning that Chad wouldn't face the death penalty, to remember her children in their happiest moments and try not to remember them as the kids who were killed by their father. Chad Dorman pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder for killing his 3 young sons: 3-year-old Chase Dorman, 4-year-old Hunter Dorman, and 7-year-old Clayton Dorman. He also pleaded guilty to 2 counts of felonious assault, felonies of the 2nd degree, for injuries to his former wife and stepdaughter. In exchange, all of the aggravating circumstances that would have made him eligible for the death penalty are being dismissed. Judge Richard Ferentz sentenced Dorman to 3 life sentences without parole, running consecutively with 16 years minimum sentencing for the assault charges. Chad's criminal record wasn't filled with violent incidents, except for an attempt to strangle his father in 2010. He was acquitted in that case due to the lack of witnesses, and the rest of his record consisted of speeding violations. In the end, the most pressing question remains: what could drive a father who fulfilled all his duties toward his children and stepdaughter to commit such a horrific act? According to psychology, there are 5 reasons why parents might kill their children. Extreme fear for them from the outside world, believing the children are doomed to a dark fate, not wanting the children, having a mental illness, seeking revenge against a spouse, or attempting to discipline the children physically, resulting in accidental death. Analyzing these reasons, in Chad's case, the first reason, a dark fate for the children, doesn't apply because his family was living well. He bought his house in 2016 for $75,000 and paid taxes regularly. Chad clearly wanted his children, as he was a loving father, even to his stepdaughter. The idea of disciplining or hurting the children out of anger towards Laura doesn't fit either, because neither the children nor Laura did anything to provoke Chad. This leaves us with the psychological factor. Even though Chad had no documented history of mental illness, his mental state in the last few months hints that he wasn't psychologically stable recently. Share your thoughts in the comments. Could Chad have experienced a sudden psychological crisis that turned him into a monster capable of killing his most precious ones? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next video.
Imagine spending 7 whole years with a narcissist who tears apart everything beautiful inside you. You stay patient, hoping he will change, but in the end, you discover he's taken even your right to live. This is what happened to Chantel Murphy and her children, Mason and Isabella. Chantel Murphy was a beautiful girl living with her parents, Tammy and Pat, in the quiet reaches of Manitoba, Canada. From a young age, she was quiet yet sharp. Her gentle nature making her loved by everyone around her. Her laughter was infectious, her quick jokes lighting up the lives of those fortunate enough to know her. Chantelle lived in her own dream world, filled with hopes of becoming a mother, pouring all her love into a child she had yet to have. This dream kept her from jumping into random relationships. She was waiting for the one, someone who could be a true partner and an ideal father. After moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, she finally settled in Calgary, Alberta. Here, she found herself close to her work and near her beloved cousin Tyler Hendry. It was here, in 2015, that she met Travis McLeod through a mutual friend, a meeting that would change everything. Travis McLeod was almost 18 years older than her. He saw her innocence from the very first moment. He knew she was different. She wore her emotions openly, didn't hide her dreams, and longed for stability. Travis wrapped himself in the guise of everything she craved. He was rational, mature, a man shaped by a failed marriage. Failed, of course, due to the stubbornness of his first wife, or so he said. Slowly, he pulled her in. Chantel found herself drawn to his words, his manner, his confidence that spoke of a man who had seen the world and knew how to handle it. She believed she'd found the one. The age difference was nothing. If anything, it was an advantage. She thought she was stepping into a stable future. But Chantel had no idea she was walking straight into a nightmare. Travis McLeod wasn't the man he pretended to be. Beneath his calm demeanor lurked a narcissist with a hidden rage, a man who whose twisted actions would make even those closest to him fear for their lives. Travis McLeod was born in 1972, growing up in Oakville, Manitoba. But even as a child, Travis wasn't the kind of son parents dream of. He was the kind they feared. His anger was unpredictable and vicious, and his brothers and little sister learned early on to keep their distance. They knew a single wrong word could trigger his terrifying wrath. No one wanted to work with him. His violent outbursts and erratic temper made him unemployable. He ended up working as an independent drywaller, alone, just as he seemed destined to be. When he was 17, he met his first girlfriend. Their relationship was filled with constant arguments, but they were young and naive, believing love could smooth out the jagged edges. Soon enough, they had a child. Travis pushed his girlfriend to marry him, urging her to become a housewife, trapped in the domestic life he wanted. She agreed, and they married. Their relationship was a roller coaster, shifting between fleeting moments of peace and deep pits of conflict. Then came the methamphetamine. The drugs transformed Travis into something far worse, a beast capable of unspeakable cruelty. He became explosively violent, and his words, dripping with venom, tore at his wife's spirit. He humiliated her even in front of his family, but they too were powerless, terrified to intervene, especially when Travis was drunk. Soon, his abuse escalated from words to fists. It was no longer just threats and insults. The bruises were undeniable. One day, his wife could take no more. After a particularly horrifying argument in which Travis threatened her life, she went to the authorities, begging for protection for herself and their son. The documents painted a picture of a home filled with dread and violence, a nightmare with no escape. They divorced. She vanished from his life, leaving behind no trace, desperate to escape his shadow. But the son wasn't so lucky. He stayed, left alone in the grip of his father. From 2004 to 2015, little was known about Travis McLeod's life. It seemed he was a ghost whose family barely communicated with him and certainly didn't welcome him. Their distance was telling, especially in light of what unfolded later. While Chantel got more closer to Travis, everything about her began to change. It wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable. Day by day, her light seemed to fade. The first person to notice was her cousin Tyler. He used to visit her during his lunch breaks, and each time he saw less and less of the Chantel he knew. Her laughter, the laughter that used to fill a room, was different. Duller. Forced. He urged her again and again to stay away from Travis, to remember who she was before he came into her life. But Chantel was under Travis's spell, and she didn't listen. She couldn't see what everyone else saw. Even her mother noticed something was wrong. The first time Tammy met Travis in 2015, she saw the age difference. It was obvious. But more than that, it was the way Chantel seemed to drift away. She called less, visited less. Travis was pulling her into his dark world, and Tammy felt it. Then there was Pat, Chantel's father. He saw Travis for what he truly was, a manipulator. His fatherly instincts screamed that this man was no good, that his charm was nothing but a mask hiding something dangerous. Pat begged Chantel to reconsider, to think twice before letting Travis take over her life. But it was too late. The darkness inside Travis moved faster than any of them could reach Chantel. By late December 2015, Travis convinced her to move to Portage la Prairie to be closer to his family. In less than a year, their daughter Isabella was born. Chantel was overjoyed at being a mother, and for a while it seemed like that joy might lift her out of Travis's shadow. But the truth couldn't stay hidden. The mask began to slip. Travis swung between being the perfect partner and a nightmare, humiliating her, then twisting the blame back onto her, making her believe it was her fault that she needed to change for him. The classic cycle of a narcissist slowly erasing his partner's identity. Then, 4 years after Isabella, Mason was born. He had his mother's lightheartedness, her love of fun. During this time, Chantel still reached out to her mother, calling to share little stories about the kids, the struggles of her day, and Mason's funny antics. It was her lifeline, her only escape. But after 2020, those calls grew fewer and further between until they almost stopped completely. Chantel was tense all the time. She avoided talking about Travis. She was trapped, her spirit slowly being crushed, her life swallowed by the man who claimed to love her. Pat knew. He knew his daughter was in trouble. He refused to let her disappear entirely. He called her, made sure she knew he was there, that no matter how far she'd fallen, she had a safe place to turn. Even if she couldn't ask for help, he wanted her to know it was there. But would it be enough to save her from Travis's tightening grip? Life continued for Chantel Murphy, but it twisted into a living nightmare. Travis McLeod's descent into chaos became relentless. His days were filled with alcohol, methamphetamine, and a deepening madness. The hallucinations, the paranoia, it all took root in his mind like a dark poison. Chantelle could see it happening, but all she could do was try to hold on to whatever light was left, focusing on her children, her only source of hope. April 10th, 2022. It was supposed to be a regular morning, but by 10 o'clock, Travis was far from sober. He had already downed more than 8 bottles of beer, his twisted fantasies taking control. He saw demons where there were none. He imagined a child trafficking ring targeting his children, and in his deluded state, he believed that Chantel was involved. Travis's eyes caught an iron pipe on the floor. His mind reeled, the rage boiling over. He grabbed it, his heart pounding as he stormed into the bedroom. There lay Chantel, asleep, vulnerable, unaware. He raised the pipe high above his head, and then it came down. Again, and again. Each blow more vicious than the last, each one tearing away at the woman who had only ever wanted love and safety. But the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Travis, fueled by madness, moved to the children's room. Little Isabella and Mason. They were so peaceful, so innocent. But innocence meant nothing to the monster he had become. The iron pipe swung down, cruel, relentless, until they were gone, their laughter silenced forever. With blood still staining his hands, Travis turned his attention to his son from his previous marriage. He shook the boy awake, his voice commanding and cold. He told him to leave. Now. The son, wide-eyed with terror, saw the blood splattered on his father's clothes and ran as if his life depended on it. He knew, deep down, it probably did. But Travis wasn't finished yet. He grabbed some clothes, piled them up, and lit them on fire. The flames caught quickly, licking up the walls, spreading as if they too were feeding off the hatred and madness that had filled this house, until the fire roared like the beast inside him. Only then did he walk away. Not long after, a neighbor noticed the smoke, the orange glow spreading through the windows of Travis McLeod's home. Panic set in, and they called the fire department. Firefighters arrived, broke down the door, only to discover a scene from their darkest nightmares. 3 bodies, a mother and her children, on the upper floor. But where was Travis? Travis, barely able to stand, staggered to his brother's house. He pounded on the window, yelling that they're all gone. His brother already knew his addiction. He saw the crazed look in Travis's eyes, the blood stains, the wildness. He refused to let him in, threatening to call the police. That word, police. It sent Travis running, his heart pounding with fear, a new kind of fear. He stumbled down the street until he reached his sister's home. He knocked, and as soon as she opened the door, he punched her in the face and telling her, "This is all because of you." She pushed him away, slamming the door shut in terror. Travis spun around, searching, desperate, crazed. His eyes fixed on the house across the street. He staggered to the door, knocked. A woman answered, and Travis tried to explain about needing help, and he told her that they'd push him into a ditch. She saw the blood, the madness, and quickly closed the door, her heart racing as she called her husband, the fire officer, battling the flames back at Travis's home. But Travis saw her talking on the phone. Panic gripped him. He turned and fled, stumbling into the unknown, running from what he had done. from the horrors he had unleashed. But how far could he run? How long until the monsters he had unleashed came for him too? After the RCMP arrived, the house was declared a crime scene. The investigation began immediately, a sense of urgency hanging in the air. The neighbors spoke in hushed, fearful tones, their statements enough for officers to piece together that Travis had some connection to the horror that unfolded inside those walls. Later that day, Travis McLeod was arrested for the first time. He was hauled in, suspicion thick around him, but he wasn't charged. Not yet. The crime lab report wasn't complete, and while a knife was found on him and blood still stained his jacket, nothing was certain without evidence. And at the end of the day, Travis walked free, the law's hands bound, until the investigation was concluded. The next day, the pieces began to fall into place. The lab results came in, and they confirmed what everyone feared. The blood on Travis's jacket. It belonged to Mason and Isabella Murphy, but the knife held no trace of his victim's blood. The police moved fast now, the search for Travis beginning in earnest. They tracked his movements, his attempts to vanish into the city. He was sighted on Monday afternoon, wandering down Magnus Avenue. Then, early Tuesday morning at 1:30 a.m., he appeared in the St. Boniface area. By Tuesday afternoon at 2:20 p.m., he was seen at the Millennium Library, and not long after, he drifted through the downtown skywalk. But there was no escaping the net closing in around him. Eventually, Travis McLeod was caught, his attempts to flee in vain.
At around 8:30 Friday evening, Winnipeg police found and arrested McLeod in downtown Winnipeg. He was seen here earlier in the week at Millennial Library and in the skywalk adjacent. After police apprehended McLeod, they handed him over to RCMP Major Crimes Unit.
This time, there would be no release. He was charged with second-degree murder. His partner, 32-year-old Chantel Murphy, and their children, 3-year-old Mason and 6-year-old Isabella. The news of Chantel Murphy and her children being brutally murdered by her partner struck Chantel's parents like a bolt of lightning. It was a shock that shattered their hearts, a grief so deep it felt endless. They remembered the warnings, the countless times they tried to tell their daughter that this man would ruin her, that he was dangerous. But now it was too late. All they could do was fight for justice, make sure to be at every trial session to see that the man who destroyed their family paid for what he did. Meanwhile, the news reached Travis's ex-wife. She knew just how close she had come to the same fate. Rage and fear filled her as she vowed that Travis would pay. She went to the press, detailing the hell she endured during their relationship. She made it clear that there was no excuse for what he had done, that the claims of him being mentally ill and affected by hallucinogenic drugs were not a justification. They were just an attempt to escape responsibility. She spoke of the abuse, the history of violence, the threats. And soon enough, court records from 2004 surfaced. Proof that Travis McLeod had a long history of domestic violence. He had assaulted her, threatened her, and forced her to file for a protection order for herself and their son. It was all there in black and white. He even had convictions in Alberta for assault, mischief, breaking court orders, and driving while impaired. But the fight didn't stop there. The ex-wife's sister, Kindra Stothers, had seen the horror that both her sister and Chantel faced. She couldn't stay silent. She organized a vigil held in front of Chantel Murphy's house, a haunting reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse. It was a cry for change, for safety, for justice for women who were victims of violence. The protest drew people from all around, each sign a reminder of the lives lost to abusers who were never stopped. Chantelle Murphy's family wasn't idle either. They launched a fundraising campaign to bring Chantel and her children back to Alberta to give them a proper resting place. They vowed that any extra funds would go to shelters to help protect women facing the same nightmare Chantel did. The campaign would stay open. They wanted to help as many as they could. And as I tell this story today, I will leave a link to the campaign in the video description. Because every voice, every action matters when it comes to fighting this darkness. The trial was a long and grueling process, lasting nearly 2 years. And then, in October 2024, Court of King's Bench Justice Chris Martin delivered his verdict. He stood in the courtroom and said that in over 20 years on the bench, he had never seen a crime as heinous as this. He sentenced Travis McLeod, now 52, to life in prison without eligibility for parole for 16 years. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was something. The Crown agreed to the 16-year period so that the family wouldn't have to endure a trial. They'd endured enough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next video.
Imagine vanishing without a trace, leaving behind 5 kids and a bitter divorce. This is the chilling story of Jennifer Dulos, the Connecticut mom whose disappearance shocked the nation. Jennifer Farber was born into a world of privilege and intellect, the daughter of a successful New York City financier, Hilliard Farber, and his wife Gloria, a philanthropist with a deep love for the arts. Raised in a prestigious household, Jennifer's life was a tapestry woven with culture, education, and the unspoken expectations that often accompany great wealth. From a young age, Jennifer was a curious and imaginative child with a natural gift for storytelling. Her parents, though busy with their own demanding lives, were deeply devoted to their only daughter. Hilliard, a man of sharp intellect and quiet determination, instilled in Jennifer a strong sense of discipline and a love for learning. Gloria, on the other hand, was the emotional heart of the family. She was a woman of grace and compassion who saw the world through the lens of an artist. Gloria introduced Jennifer to the beauty of literature music and the visual arts, taking her to galleries, concerts, and the theater. Jennifer's relationship with her parents was one of deep love-respect, and at times the quiet pressures that come with being the child of such accomplished individuals. Her father's high standards and her mother's artistic aspirations set a high bar, but they also fostered in Jennifer a sense of confidence and purpose. As she moved through her formative years, Jennifer became increasingly independent, her thoughts often turning inward as she sought to understand her place in the world. Her love for writing grew, becoming both a passion and a refuge. Jennifer Farber's life had been one of careful cultivation, an existence where intellect, culture, and creativity flourished within the safety of her well-ordered world. But all that changed when she met Fotis Dulos. It was the late 1980s, a time of youthful optimism and boundless possibility when Jennifer was a student at Brown University. Brown, with its ivy-covered halls and liberal arts ethos, was the perfect environment for a young woman like Jennifer, curious, introspective, and eager to immerse herself in the world of ideas. She was focused on her studies, committed to her writing, and largely uninterested in the distractions of college romance. Then she met Fotis. Fotis Dulos was unlike anyone Jennifer had ever known. He was a graduate student, older by a few years, studying economics with a sharp mind and an undeniable charm. Where Jennifer was introspective and reserved, Fotis was confident and charismatic, with a magnetic energy that drew people to him effortlessly. He had an air of sophistication, a worldliness that intrigued Jennifer, hinting at a life lived boldly and without the constraints she had always known. Their connection was instant, electric, a spark that lit up Jennifer's world in ways she hadn't anticipated. In Fotis, she saw a man who was unafraid to chase his dreams, a quality that resonated deeply with her own aspirations, even if they were of a different nature. But it wasn't just Fotis's ambition that drew Jennifer in, it was the way he made her feel. With him, she felt seen, in a way she hadn't before. He was attentive, engaging, and seemed to understand the parts of her that were still forming, still reaching for something beyond the life she had always known. Though their early relationship wasn't without its challenges, they were, after all, two very different people from very different worlds. As with many passionate beginnings, the intensity of Jennifer Farber and Fotis Dulos's early romance eventually gave way to the complexities of their differing paths. The whirlwind of their connection, which had once seemed destined, began to unravel under the weight of their individual aspirations and the inevitable pressures of young adulthood. It wasn't long before they found themselves at a crossroads, and the decision to part ways, though painful, seemed the only course. Jennifer, ever the introspective soul, took the breakup as a time for reflection. She returned to the life she had known before Fotis, immersing herself in her studies and later in her burgeoning career as a writer. The years that followed were a period of growth for Jennifer, a time when she rediscovered herself, nurtured her creative passions. However, the memories of her time with Fotis, though bittersweet, gradually faded into the background of her life, becoming part of the rich tapestry of experiences that shaped her. But as fate would have it, the story of Jennifer and Fotis was not yet finished. Nearly a decade after they had first parted, their lives intersected once more. It was 2004, and both had traveled far from the people they had been when they first met. Fotis had established himself as a successful businessman, his life now marked by the very ambitions that had once captivated Jennifer. She, in turn, had blossomed into a woman of quiet confidence, her writing a testament to the depth and insight she had gained over the years. Their reunion was unexpected, a chance encounter that felt almost like destiny. The years apart had changed them, yet the spark between them reignited with a new, mature intensity. This was not the impulsive passion of their youth, but a deeper, steadier connection, one forged by time and experience. Jennifer saw in Fotis a man who had grown, who had faced the challenges of life, and emerged with a sense of purpose and determination that resonated with her own journey. In a matter of months, their relationship deepened, moving from rekindled romance to a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. The decision to marry came naturally, as if it were the fulfillment of a promise made long ago. In 2004, Jennifer and Fotis exchanged vows, committing to a life together that they hoped would be filled with love, adventure, and the stability that both had come to value. Jennifer, ever the romantic at heart, believed this was their second chance, a new beginning, grounded in the lessons they had learned during their time apart. With optimism and hope, she stepped into this new chapter of her life, ready to build the future they had once imagined, now with the strength and clarity that only time could bring. And so Jennifer Farber-Doulos and Fotis Doulos embarked on their journey as husband and wife, unaware of the trials that would one day test the very foundation of their love. After their marriage in 2004, Jennifer Farber-Doulos and Fotis Doulos began what seemed to be the perfect life together. They settled in Farmington, Connecticut, where Fotis's burgeoning real estate development business allowed them to build a life of luxury and comfort. For the first few years, life was a picture of domestic bliss. Jennifer, who had always dreamed of a large family, found joy in motherhood. She embraced the role with the same dedication and care she had once given to her writing. The couple welcomed 5 children into the world, each a precious extension of their love. Jennifer poured her heart into raising them, creating a warm, nurturing environment where creativity and intellect were encouraged. She took on the responsibilities of a full-time mother with grace, her days filled with the rhythms of family life, school runs, sports practices, bedtime stories, and the 1,000 small tasks that come with raising a young family. Fotis, for his part, was deeply involved in his work. His real estate ventures flourished, and with success came the trappings of wealth, luxury cars, lavish vacations, and a lifestyle that spoke to the ambition that had always driven him. He was proud of the life they had built, the family he had with Jennifer, and the success he had achieved. To the outside world, the Doulos family seemed to have it all. However, with the huge motherhood responsibilities, The need for someone helping Jennifer was increasing over the days, and it was 2007 when Lauren Almeida entered the life of the Fotis family. Lauren Almeida's introduction into the Doulos family wasn't through the usual route of a career nanny. Initially employed in Fotis Doulos's real estate company, her sharp organizational skills and efficient management quickly made her a valued part of his business. But as tensions mounted in the Doulos household, it was Jennifer Farber Doulos who saw in Lauren something more than just a competent employee. She saw someone who could provide much-needed support in a home slowly unraveling under the weight of its internal pressures. And so, Lauren transitioned from the office into the family's personal life, brought in specifically to help Jennifer. Jennifer, overwhelmed by the mounting responsibilities of managing a large household and caring for 5 children amidst an increasingly strained marriage, turned to Lauren for assistance. Lauren's role was never meant to be purely domestic. She was brought in to alleviate some of the burdens Jennifer was quietly shouldering, and soon became a steady presence in the family's day-to-day life. As a nanny, Lauren quickly became indispensable, seamlessly weaving herself into the family's routines. To the children, she was more than just a caretaker. She was a calming, stable figure in a household that was increasingly marked by tension and uncertainty. But Lauren's presence extended far beyond childcare. She grew into a confidant for Jennifer, someone Jennifer could lean on as her world became more isolated and complex. Their bond deepened into friendship, built on shared trust, and Lauren's unspoken understanding of the struggles Jennifer faced. Beneath the surface, the pressures of maintaining the picture of perfect life began to take their toll. The demands of Fotis's work kept him away from home more often than not, and the distance between him and Jennifer slowly grew. While Jennifer found fulfillment in her role as a mother, Fotis's ambitions continued to drive him further into his work, creating a divide that neither of them fully acknowledged at first. The ease and connection they had once shared were replaced by the routines of daily life, and the once vibrant bond between them began to cool. As the years passed, the cracks in their marriage became more pronounced. Jennifer, who had always been introspective, began to sense that something was amiss. Fotis's absences grew longer, and when he was home, he seemed distracted, preoccupied with thoughts that he didn't share. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and plans, became more practical, more focused on the logistics of managing a large family. The intimacy they had once cherished began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of distance. It was during this time that Michelle Traconis entered their lives. Fotis met Michelle during a surfing competition where Foto was an old surfing champion, and Michelle was also a surfing enthusiast. She was a woman of striking beauty, with a vivacious personality that immediately captivated him. Unlike Jennifer, who was quiet and reflective, Michelle was bold, adventurous, and unafraid to take risks. She brought a sense of excitement and spontaneity that Fotis had been missing, reigniting a spark that he hadn't felt in years. Their relationship began as a friendship, but it quickly developed into something more. Fotis was drawn to Michelle's energy, her zest for life, and the way she made him feel alive, unburdened, and free from the responsibilities that had begun to weigh him down at home. With Michelle, Fotis could escape the pressures of his life, even if just for a moment, and this escape became increasingly alluring. As Fotis's relationship with Michelle deepened, his behavior at home began to change. He became more distant, more irritable, and less engaged with Jennifer and the children. The warmth that had once defined their family life was replaced by tension and unease. Jennifer, ever perceptive, sensed the shift in Fotis, but for a time, she chose to remain silent, hoping that whatever was pulling him away would pass. But it didn't. The change in Fotis was undeniable. He spent more time away from home, and when he was there, his mind seemed elsewhere. The emotional distance between him and Jennifer grew into a chasm, one that neither of them seemed able or willing to bridge. Jennifer's efforts to reconnect were met with indifference, and slowly she began to realize that the marriage she had once believed in so deeply was slipping away. Lauren was there as the cracks in Jennifer and Fotis's marriage widened. She witnessed the subtle and not-so-subtle shifts in the household, the distance that grew between Jennifer and Fotis. The way Fotis's attention shifted away from his family and toward Michelle Troconis. As Fotis became more erratic, his absences more frequent, Lauren was one of the few people who saw the full extent of Jennifer's emotional strain. Her loyalty was firmly with Jennifer, whose once peaceful home was now filled with silent arguments and simmering tension. By the time Jennifer fully understood the extent of Fotis's relationship with Michelle, the damage had been done. The life they had built together, once filled with love and promise, had turned cold. Fotis was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. He was a stranger in their home, a man whose ambitions and desires had led him down a path that Jennifer could no longer follow, as the distance between Jennifer Farber-Dulos and Fotis Dulos grew into an unbridgeable chasm. Jennifer's intuition, which had once connected her so deeply with her husband, now served as a guide through the fog of suspicion and betrayal. With the delicacy of a writer teasing out the subtext of a complicated character, Jennifer began to collect evidence of Fotis's infidelity. Her approach was methodical, marked by a quiet determination not to leap to conclusions without substantive proof. She noticed inconsistencies first in Fotis's schedules, his unexplained absences that could no longer be chalked up to long hours at work. There were receipts, credit card statements that hinted at dinners, gifts, and getaways that did not include her. Phone records spoke in silent volumes, listing countless calls to a number she didn't recognize. Each piece was a painful addition to a mosaic of betrayal, telling a story she had never hoped to read. Standing in the middle of their once shared space, Jennifer spoke with a calmness that masked the turmoil she felt inside. "I know about Michelle," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. Fotis, caught off guard by her directness, didn't deny it. For a moment, he tried to downplay it to excuse his behavior. But under Jennifer's unwavering gaze, he finally confessed. It wasn't a grand confession, no dramatic outpouring of guilt or remorse, but rather an admission that was cold and resigned, as though the affair had already been written into the final chapters of their marriage. Jennifer stood there, absorbing his words, 1,000 emotions, swirling beneath her composed exterior. She didn't break down or shout. She had already been preparing for this moment in her heart for months, and now that the truth was out, it felt like a dark weight had lifted. But with the confession came a new clarity. There was no salvaging this marriage. The man she had once loved had become someone she no longer recognized, and now she needed to act, not just for herself, but for her children. Jennifer sought out Lauren. The two women had grown close in recent months, Lauren becoming Jennifer's quiet confidant, as the tension in the household thickened. Jennifer's voice was low, filled with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too many burdens for too long. "He admitted it," she told Lauren, her words heavy with both sadness and finality. Lauren's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Jennifer explained that she needed to start making plans to move things out of the house before she formally filed for divorce. It wasn't just about protecting herself emotionally anymore. It was about securing the future for her children. She spoke of the divorce like it was inevitable, something she had already accepted in her mind but now had to put into action. Lauren, ever the steady presence, listened intently and reassured Jennifer that she would help in any way she could. They both knew that from this point forward, things would only grow more complicated. But for now, they shared a quiet understanding that Jennifer's departure from the home wasn't just physical. It was the first step toward leaving behind the life she had once built with Fotis. In the months following the confrontation, Jennifer Dulas and Lauren Almeida moved with quiet determination, methodically packing up the children's belongings and preparing for a life away from the home that had become a battleground. Jennifer had chosen her steps carefully, keeping her plans from Fotis, not out of fear, but from the knowledge that any hint of her leaving could spark a confrontation before she was ready. It was a slow, deliberate process, small items, disappearing pieces of the children's lives, being transported to the new house Jennifer had secured at Wells Lane, New Canaan, building a new future for them, away from Fotis's growing instability. Then came the day when Fotis returned to the house and felt the cold weight of realization hit him like a blow. The house, once filled with the clutter and chaos of family life, now felt strangely empty rooms devoid of toys, clothes, and the warmth of his children's presence. He stood in the hollowed-out rooms, the weight of Jennifer's departure crashing over him like a wave. This wasn't just a temporary retreat, not just a pause in their marital conflict. Jennifer was gone, and with her, the life he had once controlled. The shock quickly turned to rage when Fotis learned that Jennifer had not only left, but had also filed for divorce. His fury was immediate and palpable. He confronted Jennifer, no longer the calm, collected figure he once prided himself on being. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with barely contained anger as he issued his threat. "I'll take the kids, Jennifer. You won't keep them from me. I'll take them to Greece if I have to. You'll never see them again." His words, meant to intimidate, instead revealed the depth of his desperation, his need to reassert control over a situation that was spiraling beyond his grasp. Jennifer, though shaken, was no longer the woman who had stood silently in the face of Fotis's manipulations. His threats only steeled her resolve. She knew that Fotis's anger wasn't just bluster, he was capable of dangerous decisions, and the safety of her children had become her sole priority. In the face of his threats, Jennifer made the decision to hire private bodyguards. It wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about ensuring her children's safety from a man whose unpredictability had grown with every passing day. The presence of the bodyguards became a quiet but ever-present reminder that Jennifer would not back down, that she was prepared for the lengths Fotis might go to regain control. Meanwhile, the divorce battle unfolded in the courts, a bitter and protracted war that consumed Fotis's life and his finances. Determined to fight Jennifer at every turn, he poured vast sums of money into the legal fight, hiring expensive attorneys and engaging in a legal war of attrition. But the costs mounted, not only financially, but also emotionally. Fotis's company, once a thriving venture, began to feel the strain of the money hemorrhaging from the divorce proceedings. His real estate empire, built on ambition and hard work, began to crack under the pressure of the escalating legal fees and his growing financial instability. Despite Fotis's best efforts, the courtroom became a place where his control faltered. Jennifer, with her careful documentation of his infidelity and threats, held the stronger hand. The judge's rulings increasingly favored her, recognizing the dangerous instability of Fotis's behavior. In the end, the court ruled that Fotis could only see his children under supervision, a devastating blow to a man who had once vowed to take them away entirely. His threats, his anger, all had backfired, leaving him not in control, but bound by the very system he had tried to manipulate. The divorce battle had drained Fotis, leaving him financially weakened and emotionally unmoored. His once thriving company now staggered under the weight of legal costs and lost focus. In contrast, Jennifer, though weary from the fight, had secured the most important victory, her children's safety and her independence. The final chapter of their marriage had not ended as Fotis had expected. Instead of winning, Fotis found himself on the outside looking in the power he had once wielded slipping away, lost in a battle he could no longer control. After Jennifer left the family home, Michelle Troconis moved in with Fotis Doulos, stepping into the space Jennifer had once occupied, both physically and emotionally. The once grand house that had been a symbol of Jennifer and Fotis's shared life now became the backdrop for something much darker. Fotis, reeling from Jennifer's departure, and the realization that the divorce battle would not go in his favor, was a man consumed by rage and desperation. His world, once so meticulously controlled, was crumbling around him, and the simmering anger that had been present in the background now surfaced with full force. Michelle sensed the shift in Fotis immediately. Gone was the confident, charismatic man she had once been drawn to. In his place was someone weakened by the unraveling of his life, desperate to regain what he was losing. Fotis's anger was palpable, a constant undercurrent in the house, affecting everything from the way he spoke to how he carried himself. Michelle, attuned to his emotional state, understood that this was a moment of vulnerability for him, a moment she could use to solidify her place by his side. Her support wasn't just passive. Michelle was active in showing that she would do whatever it took to help Fotis. No matter how far down the path of darkness his thoughts ventured. She wasn't just offering comfort, she was validating his worst impulses, giving him the confidence to believe that he could fight Jennifer, not just in court, but through any means necessary. In Michelle, Fotis found not only a partner, but a co-conspirator, someone who would stand by him no matter what decisions he made, even if those decisions involved crossing moral and legal lines. The conversation between Fotis and Michelle Troconis marked a grim turning point, one where the abstract thoughts of anger and frustration turned into something far more dangerous and irreversible. They sat together in the quiet, darkened house, the weight of Fotis's unresolved fury pressing heavily in the air. His face, usually controlled and composed, betrayed the intensity of his thoughts. Michelle could sense that something monumental was about to happen, that the anger, long simmering, was about to boil over into something darker. Fotis spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. "This can't go on, Michelle. Jennifer, she's ruining everything. She's winning in court, taking the kids. If I don't stop her now, she'll take everything." Michelle's eyes flickered with uncertainty for a brief moment, sensing the shift in Fotis's tone, but she held his gaze, waiting for him to continue. "I have to get rid of her," he said, the words falling like stones between them, heavy and final. "There's no other way. I need you to help me." For a split second, Michelle was taken aback. The reality of what he was saying hit her like a jolt, a fleeting moment of surprise flashing across her face. She hadn't expected him to say it so plainly. But in the next heartbeat, she steadied herself. She had pledged to support him, to stand by his side no matter what. And now, here it was, the ultimate test of her loyalty. Her hesitation was brief, her face softening into one of calculated calm. "I see," she said slowly, gauging his reaction. "Tell me more. How do you plan to do it?" Her voice was steady, almost reassuring, as if this were just another step in a series of decisions they were making together. She wanted to know what he had in mind, what her role would be in this dangerous game they were about to play. Fotis leaned in, his voice lowering, speaking as though sharing a secret. "I know her routine, Michelle. I know exactly when she's alone, when no one's around. I'll do it when she least expects it, when the kids are away, and no one will know. I'll make it look like she disappeared, and by the time they figure out what happened, it'll be too late." Michelle nodded slowly, absorbing his words, her mind racing. "And me?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the plan. "What do you need me to do?" "I need an alibi," Fotis replied, his voice sharper now, his desperation beginning to show. "I need you to be my cover. You can say we were together, that we spent the day together. We'll make sure people see us out. I just need you to make sure no one questions where I was when it happens." Michelle's heart pounded in her chest, but outwardly she remained calm, her expression unreadable. She had stepped into something she hadn't fully anticipated, but there was no turning back now. "I can do that," she said, her voice steady, though her mind churned with the enormity of what they were discussing. "I'll do whatever you need me to do." Fotis, sensing her willingness, leaned back slightly, relief washing over him. He believed that with Michelle by his side, this plan, this unthinkable, irreversible plan, could work. She was his ally, his accomplice, and together they would erase Jennifer from their lives once and for all. But even as Michelle voiced her agreement, there was a part of her that recognized the danger she was stepping into. This wasn't just about loyalty anymore. This was about survival, about navigating the dark waters Fotis had plunged them both into. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was part of a plan that could destroy them all. The day before the tragic event unfolded, the Doulos household appeared to be running as smoothly as any other, a deceptive calm settling over the home. Lauren Almeida, ever attentive and dedicated to her role, spent the afternoon tidying up the house, keeping the routines and rhythms of family life intact, despite the growing tension lurking beneath the surface. As she went about her tasks, she noticed that the tissues in the house were running low, something so ordinary yet important, in the backdrop of a house filled with children. She went to the storeroom and found only one packet left, making a mental note to remind Jennifer to buy more. It was such a small, forgettable detail in the context of everything else, but it served as one of the last normal moments before everything changed. Later that evening, as the sun cast long shadows over the home, Jennifer and Lauren briefly crossed paths. Their conversation was simple, routine like any other day. Jennifer mentioned her plans for the next day. She had a dentist appointment in the morning and asked Lauren to pick up the children from school later. She told Lauren that she'd be heading to New York afterwards, where they would meet up at her mother's house. The two agreed on the plan, parting with no indication of the storm that was about to erupt in their lives. To Lauren, it was just another ordinary day, a brief conversation that would soon be swallowed by the events to come. Meanwhile, far from the calm of the house, Fotis Doulos and Michelle Triconis were moving with a different kind of purpose. That evening, while the rest of the world went about its routine, they were finalizing the last dark touches on the plan that had been simmering between them for weeks. Their conversations hushed and intense focused on the details that would ensure Jennifer's disappearance was swift and unnoticed. Fotis was methodical, driven by a cold determination to take back control of his life, his children, his reputation, his future. Everything in his mind depended on this moment. On the morning of May 24th, 2019, Jennifer Doulos started her day in the usual way. She drove her children to school in her Chevrolet Suburban, dropping them off with their backpacks and lunchboxes, perhaps sharing a few parting words of love and routine reminders. Once her children were safely at school, she returned home to her quiet house in New Canaan. It was a calm, peaceful morning, and Jennifer settled into the familiar comfort of her kitchen, making herself a cup of tea as she prepared to head out for a dentist appointment later that day. Unbeknownst to Jennifer Fotis, Doulos had already set his dark plan into motion. In those same early morning hours, Fotis had took his employee, Paavo Gumani Toyota Tacoma, deliberately choosing a vehicle that couldn't be easily connected to him. Inside the truck was a bicycle, an essential piece of his premeditated scheme. He drove the Toyota toward Jennifer's home, his mind focused on the grim task ahead. Parking the truck a short distance from her house, Fotis unloaded the bike and rode toward the property, carefully disguised in loose clothing and a cap to conceal his identity. Every movement was calculated, every action part of a meticulously thought-out plan. He approached Jennifer's house quietly, knowing her routine and anticipating that she would be alone. Once inside the house, Jennifer likely had no warning of what was to come. At some point, Fotis entered the home and carried out his brutal attack, eliminating her in the very place where she had sought peace and refuge. In the minutes that followed, Fotis worked quickly to clean up the scene. Using cleaning supplies, including the now infamous blood-stained paper towels, he attempted to erase any trace of what had occurred inside the house. Fotis then moved to the next part of his plan. He will use one of Jennifer-owned cars, as she owned a Range Rover and a Chevrolet Suburban. After killing her, Fotis placed her body in the back of the Suburban, intending to transport her and her belongings away from the scene. He left the house in her vehicle, driving to a predetermined location to hide the evidence of his crime. Later, he returned to the Toyota Tacoma, the truck that had served as his transport to and from the scene, and proceeded to dispose of incriminating items. At around 11 o'clock that morning, Lauren Almeida arrived at Jennifer Farber-Dulas's house to carry out her usual routine of tidying up before picking the children up from school. It was a peaceful day, and Lauren had already mentally mapped out her tasks for the morning. Jennifer had mentioned her plans to see the dentist before heading to New York City, so Lauren expected to find traces of that, perhaps an empty teacup. But when Lauren stepped inside, something felt off almost immediately. Jennifer's bag was still sitting where it had been the night before, untouched. The tea she always made as part of her morning routine hadn't been brewed. Lauren paused for a moment, a flicker of confusion crossing her mind. It wasn't like Jennifer to leave the house without her bag, nor was it in her nature to abandon the small rituals that marked the start of her day. Still, Lauren brushed the unease aside, telling herself that perhaps Jennifer had left in a rush. As Lauren moved through the house, her attention shifted to tidying up. But soon, another odd detail caught her eye. The tissues that she had placed by the sink the day before were completely gone. She frowned, recalling that the tissues had been nearly full. Maybe the children spilled something, she thought, reasoning that kids could go through supplies quickly. Still, it gnawed at her. Something felt off. Lauren decided to replenish the tissues and headed to the storeroom to get another pack. That's when the unease deepened. The stock of tissues was nearly depleted, far more than she would have expected. It was puzzling, but she pushed the thought aside once again. There were still practical tasks to do, and Lauren had to focus on getting the children from school, as she and Jennifer had agreed the previous evening. However, the unease lingered. When Lauren stepped outside, another strange thing caught her eye. Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban was gone, but the Range Rover remained. The choice of vehicle struck Lauren as odd. Jennifer had told her she planned to take the Range Rover because it was easier to park in New York's busy streets. Why would she have taken the Chevrolet instead? The question lingered in her mind as she got into her own car and headed to pick up the children. As she drove, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Still, she tried to reassure herself. Maybe it's all just a coincidence, she thought, hoping her gut was wrong. But her concerns began to grow, especially when one of the children asked to use their iPad. Normally, Jennifer would approve such things, so Lauren sent her a quick message, asking if it was okay. As she continued driving, her phone remained silent. Minutes passed. No response from Jennifer. This was unusual. Jennifer was always prompt with her replies, especially when it came to the children. Lauren's heart began to race, her earlier concerns now swelling into full-blown worry. Jennifer never ignored messages about her kids. Something was wrong. As she continued toward New York City, the pit in her stomach grew heavier, and the feeling that something abnormal was happening became impossible to ignore. As Lauren Almeida and the children arrived in New York, her sense of unease had deepened into full-blown dread. She had hoped that Jennifer might somehow appear, ready to meet them as planned. But the absence, the silence, it was all too much. Jennifer had never failed to show up when it came to her children. Something was terribly wrong. Lauren quickly made a call to Jennifer's dentist, desperate for any sign that the day had simply gone off course. The voice on the other end confirmed her worst fear. Jennifer had never made it to her appointment. The pit in Lauren's stomach widened into a cold, crushing certainty. Jennifer was missing. Panic rose in her chest as her thoughts raced through the possible reasons behind this sudden disappearance. One thing stood out with terrifying clarity: Fotis. The bitter, ongoing divorce battle. The threats, the sense that Jennifer had been living under a cloud of danger ever since she'd left him. Without wasting another moment, Lauren dialed 911. Her voice trembled with urgency as she explained the situation. "Jennifer is missing," she told the dispatcher. "She never showed up to her appointment, and she's in the middle of a fierce divorce battle with her ex-husband. I'm afraid for her life." The words tumbled out in a rush, a desperate plea for someone to act quickly before it was too late. The police responded swiftly. Within minutes, they called Lauren back, asking her for any details that might help them gain entry into Jennifer's house. They needed to check the property to look for any sign of where she might have gone. Lauren, still reeling from the gravity of the situation, gave them the garage lock code. She trusted the police, but part of her feared what they might find once they stepped inside. The officers approached the house cautiously, the quiet, peaceful exterior betraying nothing of the dark secrets that might lie within. They used the code Lauren had given them and entered through the garage, their senses heightened, scanning every corner for any sign of Jennifer. What they were about to discover would turn the entire town of New Canaan upside down. As they moved through the house, they were unaware that they were stepping into what would become one of the most perplexing and high-profile cases they had ever encountered. The house, at first glance, offered no immediate answers, just the eerie stillness of a home where something was terribly amiss. Each room was a puzzle, each object a potential clue, and somewhere hidden beneath the ordinary veneer of daily life lay the beginnings of a mystery that would grip the nation. The sudden and unexplained disappearance of Jennifer Dulos, a woman caught in a storm of danger, betrayal, and unimaginable tragedy. Lauren waiting anxiously and had no idea that the events she had just set in motion would spark one of the largest investigations in the history of the quiet community. One that would shake the lives of everyone involved, with Fotis Dulos at the heart of it all. As the officers moved through Jennifer Dulos's house, the atmosphere shifted from one of quiet suspicion to something far more chilling. After a thorough sweep of the site before of the home yielded no sign of Jennifer, they turned back toward the garage for a second examination. What they found this time would change the course of their investigation and cast a dark shadow over what had once been considered a missing person case. There, on the cold garage floor, the officers discovered faint but unmistakable traces of blood that had been hastily wiped away. The telltale smudges were enough to raise alarms, but it was the additional discovery, a series of scratches and dents on Jennifer's Range Rover, that sent their suspicions spiraling. The car bearing fresh marks that suggested a recent collision added another piece to a puzzle that was quickly turning sinister. The officers, now certain they were dealing with something far more grave than a simple disappearance, swiftly moved into action. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a possible homicide. The gravity of the situation hit immediately, and within minutes, calls were made to all relevant departments. Investigators, forensics experts, and crime scene photographers were notified, and those even on vacation were called back to assist with what was shaping up to be one of the most critical cases the town had ever seen. The police's vigilance was evident in their quick mobilization, their instincts driving them to secure every detail, and preserve every trace of evidence. The crime scene tape went up, cordoning off Jennifer's once peaceful home, now officially declared a crime scene. As the investigation escalated, another discovery jolted the case forward. Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban was found abandoned near a dense wooded area, roughly 3 to 4 miles from her house. The location was remote far enough to suggest an intentional attempt to hide the vehicle, but not so distant that it couldn't be connected back to Jennifer. When investigators arrived, their initial examination confirmed the worst. There were visible traces of blood inside the car. The Suburban was immediately considered a critical piece of evidence. Its condition and the bloodstains found inside raised troubling questions about Jennifer's fate, and the officers handling the scene knew this vehicle could hold vital clues to solving the mystery. The professionalism of the police shone through as they made the decision to keep the car in place, securing it with a guard until it could be carefully transported to the station for further forensic examination in the morning. With the Chevrolet under constant surveillance, the police ensured that nothing would compromise the evidence within. Their meticulousness, from securing the garage to ensuring the preservation of Jennifer's vehicle, reflected their commitment to uncovering the truth, piece by piece. They knew that within these traces, blood, fibers, DNA lay the answers to a crime that was now suspected to be more than just a disappearance. By the end of that day, the police, forensics teams, and investigators were already moving swiftly, piecing together the first clues in what would become a national headline. The investigation into the mysterious disappearance and potential murder of Jennifer Farber-Dulos. As anxiety gripped Jennifer Farber-Dulos's friends and family, and as the police began to unravel the first troubling clues of her disappearance, Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis quietly shifted into the second phase of their meticulously planned cover-up. While investigators worked around the clock to piece together what had happened, Fotis and Michelle were busy executing a strategy designed to cast doubt and divert suspicion. Fotis returned home in the borrowed Toyota Tacoma, his mind laser-focused on ensuring that the alibi he and Michelle had crafted would hold up. The plan was simple, but relied heavily on Michelle's cooperation and attention to detail. Together they had prepared a timeline, an alibi that would show Fotis had been at home throughout the morning of May 24th, when Jennifer vanished. Every hour of the morning had been mapped out, each action carefully designed to create the illusion that Fotis had never left the house. Michelle's role was crucial. As Fotis moved in and out of sight, she was tasked with handling his phone, making sure to use it in ways that would suggest he was home the entire time. She sent texts, checked apps, and even made sure the GPS was turned on, all while Fotis was miles away, carrying out the horrific act. The goal was simple: to plant evidence that would show, digitally at least, that Fotis hadn't left his home. One of the most important elements of the plan came when Michelle received a phone call from one of Fotis's friend in Greece called Mawani. Coolly, she answered, claiming that Fotis was home but busy, providing just enough detail to make the lie seem believable. The alibi needed to be seamless, and Michelle played her part without hesitation. She made sure every move was executed with precision, her actions carefully recorded by the phone's GPS tracking and data usage logs. After Michelle confirmed that everything had been handled on her end, the two of them set off to deal with another critical part of their plan, disposing of the rest of Jennifer's belongings. They left the borrowed Toyota and used another vehicle to move through the streets under the watchful eyes of surveillance cameras, which would later capture them disposing of bags and trash bins along a route stretching across Hartford. These bags would later be found to contain incriminating evidence, including blood-stained items, cleaning supplies, and clothing linked to Jennifer's murder. Once the task was complete, Fotis and Michelle returned home, trying to act as though nothing was amiss. However, when they arrived, Fotis's employee, the owner of the Toyota Tacoma, was already there. Paavo Gumani, who had no idea Fotis had taken his vehicle earlier that day, was there to retrieve it. Fotis, unfazed, quickly fabricated a story. He explained to Paavo Gumani that Michelle had taken the car key with her to her house, a casual lie meant to cover his tracks without raising suspicion. Paavo Gumani, unaware of the darker events unfolding beneath the surface, accepted the explanation and left, oblivious to the grim reality that his truck had been used as part of a murder cover-up. Fotis and Michelle, meanwhile, were left to wonder if their carefully laid plans would be enough to protect them from the growing storm of suspicion that was about to descend upon their lives. In the days following Jennifer Farber Dulas's sudden disappearance, the police worked tirelessly to gather evidence and piece together the fragments of what was quickly turning into a complex and high-profile investigation. Her house remained cordoned off, a crime scene filled with unanswered questions. Officers combed through every room, every corner, while forensics meticulously collected blood samples and other physical evidence. Outside, search teams ventured into the nearby forest, focusing on the area where Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban had been found abandoned. The scent of urgency hung heavy in the air, and everyone was united in the effort to find her. Neighbors, shocked by the disappearance of someone they had known as a caring mother and kind person, rallied to assist the police. In this close-knit community, Jennifer's absence wasn't just a mystery, it was a personal blow. People offered to help in any way they could, providing insights into Jennifer's routine and habits, and even turning over footage from home security cameras. One neighbor, whose house had a camera that captured a fleeting glimpse of Jennifer's car moving away from her home, handed over the entire camera system to the police. They wanted to help, hoping that the hard drive might hold a key piece of evidence, a clue, perhaps, as to what had happened that morning. With each passing day, the tension grew thicker, and the police continued to pursue every lead. Investigators reviewed hours of footage from cameras positioned near Jennifer's house and cross-referenced the data, searching for any sign of her movements or suspicious activity. Their search spread across the neighborhood, from roads to wooded areas. As they retraced the path they believed Jennifer had traveled, even the smallest details were treated with painstaking care. Yet, amid the widespread concern, there was one glaring exception: Jennifer's estranged husband, Fotis Dulas. While her family and neighbors showed immense worry and distress, Fotis's behavior stood in stark contrast. Despite the gravity of the situation, he showed no signs of distress over Jennifer's disappearance. His demeanor remained disturbingly calm, almost detached, as if the unfolding investigation had no real impact on him. There were no pleas for help, no appearances at the police station, and no concern for his missing wife. Instead, Fotis's focus seemed elsewhere. He exchanged a few conversations with Lauren Almeida, the nanny, regarding the children, offering reassurances that they would be fine. But these were hollow words, spoken more out of necessity than genuine emotion. Behind the scenes, Fotis's primary concern was not the search for Jennifer, but rather ensuring that the investigation didn't come too close to him. His detached curiosity centered on what the police were uncovering and whether they were any closer to finding her. Fotis's strange indifference didn't go unnoticed. As friends, family, and neighbors gathered, consumed by worry and hope, Fotis remained an island unto himself, focused on controlling the narrative and protecting his own interests. His lack of urgency, coupled with his growing evasiveness, began to raise suspicions, not just among investigators, but within the very community he was attempting to deceive. As the police deepened their investigation, they were beginning to sense that while many people in Jennifer's life were desperate to find her, Fotis Dulas was working hard to make sure that they didn't. The stage was set for the unraveling of his carefully constructed alibi, and his cold, detached manner was soon to become a significant part of the story, further implicating him in Jennifer's tragic disappearance. As the days stretched on without a trace of Jennifer Farber-Dulos, the investigation became more complex and more urgent. The police were certain that Fotis Dulos was responsible for Jennifer's murder, but they lacked the conclusive evidence to prove it. Two key elements remained elusive: finding Jennifer's body, which would confirm that a crime had occurred, and linking Fotis definitively to her death. Determined to build a case that would force Fotis to confess or break under pressure, the police shifted their strategy. Knowing that he had shown no willingness to cooperate or assist in the search, they turned their focus on his every movement during the day of Jennifer's disappearance. If they could pinpoint where he had been and what he had done, they could potentially expose enough holes in his alibi to break the case wide open. Fotis's actions on the morning of May 24th quickly came under scrutiny. Through surveillance footage, the police traced his movements as he drove through Hartford, casually disposing of items in trash bins along the road. A woman, later identified as Michelle Triconis, was seen accompanying him, confirming her involvement in the cover-up. The discarded bags, which the police had painstakingly tracked, eventually led to a critical discovery: Jennifer's clothes, soaked with blood. After DNA analysis, it was confirmed that the blood belonged to Jennifer, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the investigation. But the police didn't stop there. Their investigation uncovered even more damning evidence. Michelle had reportedly burned some of Jennifer's belongings. In the days following the crime, neighbors noticed thick smoke billowing from her chimney, an unusual sight, which raised suspicions. This, combined with the trash bags, prompted the police to request a search warrant for Michelle's house. Although the legal process took time, the investigators were now operating with a heightened sense of urgency, knowing they were closing in on the truth. The police had also caught wind of another critical detail. 5 days after Jennifer's disappearance, Fotis had taken his employee-borrowed car to a car wash, scrubbing it meticulously to remove any potential evidence. This action, too, was caught on surveillance cameras, each piece of evidence layered on the next, painting an increasingly clear picture of Fotis's guilt. With mounting evidence, Fotis was finally brought in for questioning. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming proof, he denied every accusation, his demeanor cold and unyielding. He continued to refuse any involvement, clinging to the lies he had woven since the day of the crime. But the investigation had progressed far beyond the need for Fotis's cooperation. The trail of evidence was more than enough to bring formal charges against him. Michelle Triconis, however, began to crack under the pressure. Unlike Fotis, who maintained his stoic silence, Michelle seemed to waver. In a bid to help herself, she agreed to talk to the police and participated in 3 separate interviews. Yet, her attempts to shield herself only deepened her involvement. Her statements were riddled with contradictions. At one point, she claimed to know nothing about Jennifer's disappearance, and in another breath, she insisted that Fotis had been with her at home during the crime, even going as far as saying they were in the shower together. The conflicting accounts only added fuel to the police's case, each version exposing the shaky foundation of their alibi. In the end, it was the inconsistencies in Michelle's story that provided the final nail in the coffin for both her and Fotis. The police knew they were on the right track. With the blood-stained clothes, the surveillance footage, the car washing, and Michelle's contradictory statements, the authorities had more than enough to make their case. Fotis Dulos was arrested and charged with the murder of Jennifer Farber-Dulos. Michelle Triconis also was arrested and charged conspiracy to commit murder. Their plan had unraveled, not through a confession, but through the relentless pursuit of justice, and the meticulous gathering of evidence that left no room for doubt. As the investigation into Jennifer Farber Doulas's disappearance deepened, the police made a significant breakthrough. They were able to trace the Toyota Tacoma that Fotis Dulas had used on the day of the crime, a vehicle belonging to one of Fotis's employees. With this discovery, they sought out the employee for questioning, hoping to gather more information about Fotis's actions during the crucial hours following Jennifer's disappearance. Paavo Gumani, realizing the gravity of the situation, agreed to cooperate with the police. He confessed that he had not initially known that Fotis had taken his truck on the day of the crime. When he found out Fotis had asked him for a favor that raised even more suspicions, he requested Paavo Gumani get rid of all the car seats in the truck. Though hesitant, Paavo complied and replaced the seats, but he made the fateful decision to keep the old ones in storage. During his confession, Paavo Gumani also revealed disturbing insights into the planning of the crime. He spoke of how, in the days leading up to Jennifer's murder, Michelle Troconis had shown a deep and intense hatred for Jennifer. He described conversations filled with bitterness, making it clear that Michelle was fully aware of the tension between Fotis and Jennifer, and had her own stake in the conflict. The old truck seats Paavo Gumani had kept became crucial evidence. When the police recovered them, they sent them for forensic analysis, and the results were damning. Traces of Jennifer's DNA were found on the seats, confirming that her body had been in the vehicle. This discovery added another critical layer to the case, providing tangible proof of Fotis's direct involvement in the crime. In the meantime, both Fotis and Michelle had been released on bail, awaiting trial. Their bail conditions were strict. They were prohibited from contacting each other in any form and were not allowed to leave their homes, except for essential activities like doctor visits or religious services. Michelle returned to her house, while Fotis went back to his own home, their partnership in crime severed by the court's order. From that point forward, they never saw each other again. As the legal process moved forward, a court hearing was scheduled for Fotis on January 30th, 2020. It was expected to be a critical moment in the case, but Fotis never appeared. Concerned, the police were dispatched to his home, where they discovered him inside his car in the garage. He had attempted suicide by poisoning himself, and though they rushed him to the hospital, Fotis Dulas was pronounced dead shortly after. The police found a handwritten suicide note in which Fotis vehemently denied his guilt. In his final words, he proclaimed that he was innocent of Jennifer's murder and insisted that Michelle Troconis had no involvement in the crime. The news of Fotis's suicide sent shockwaves through both Jennifer's loved ones and the wider community. For Jennifer's family and friends, the pain was doubled. Not only had they lost her, but Fotis's death meant they would likely never learn the whereabouts of her body, leaving a permanent void in their search for closure. The knowledge that Fotis would escape the punishment he deserved was a bitter blow, one that left many feeling robbed of justice. On the other hand, Michelle Troconis and her family reacted quite differently to the news. There was a palpable sense of relief among them, particularly in the wake of Fotis's suicide note, which absolved Michelle of any responsibility. Michelle's demeanor in the days following Fotis's death was telling. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a subtle yet noticeable ease about her, a visible lightness that hadn't been there before. For Michelle, the nightmare of being implicated in the crime seemed to be lifting, her connection to Fotis fading into the past with his death. Though Fotis's suicide brought an end to one chapter of the tragic saga, it left behind countless questions, chief among them the haunting mystery of where Jennifer's body lay. For those who loved her, it was a wound that would never fully heal, compounded by the knowledge that the man responsible for her disappearance had taken the secrets of that fateful day to the grave. As Michelle Troconis's trial unfolded, It became a solemn ritual for Jennifer Farber Dulos's friends and family. With heavy hearts and unwavering resolve, they attended every session, determined to honor Jennifer's memory, even in the absence of her physical presence. They knew they might never uncover where Jennifer's body was, but they were steadfast in their commitment to ensuring that justice was served. Each day in court was a reminder of the loss they endured, but it also served as a testament to their resilience, their refusals to let Jennifer's story fade. After months of hearings, testimonies, and evidence, the trial came to its emotional conclusion. Michelle Troconis, whose involvement in the cover-up of Jennifer's disappearance and presumed murder had been carefully laid out before the court, faced her final judgment. In the packed courtroom, with Jennifer's loved ones looking on, Judge Kevin Randolph handed down the sentence. Troconis was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with execution suspended after 14 and a half years, marking the end of a long and harrowing journey for both sides. For Jennifer's family, the sentencing brought a measure of justice, even though the pain of not knowing Jennifer's fate would always linger. It was not the full closure they longed for, but it was a step toward accountability, a reminder that those who played a role in this tragic crime would face consequences for their actions. As Michelle Troconis was led away, Jennifer's loved ones held onto their memories of her, their hearts heavy, but their resolve stronger than ever. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next video. The boy looked skeletal, with skin stretched tightly over his bones and almost no body fat. His skin was sunken into the hollows of his face. His eyes were deep set and surrounded by dark circles. His hair was brittle. He also had abrasions and bruises on his body. These were the words Detective Zarneski used to describe the body of 6-year-old Deshawn Martinez when she saw him on the day of the crime. How could a child end up in such a state? How could a mother and father be involved in this crime? Was it a heartless family that starved their child to death? This is what we will investigate in today's true crime documentary about the murder of Deshawn Martinez by his parents in 2020. Anthony Martinez, 18 years old, and Elizabeth Archibek, 19 years old, were high school sweethearts who graduated from Flagstaff High School in 2015. They decided not to continue their education due to their financial situation. Anthony, a young man with a controlling personality and an obsession with all things bizarre, decided to pursue a career in tattooing, which he found to be a good fit given his drawing talent. It provided him with an income to start his life. Elizabeth, however, had been addicted to methamphetamines since birth and lacked any skills to secure a suitable job. She had also suffered from various psychological issues and childhood traumas on top of her addiction. Her job search was much more difficult than Anthony's, as the effects of drugs and mental illness were evident to potential employers who were reluctant to hire her. Eventually, Elizabeth found a job at a nearby animal shelter in Flagstaff, Arizona, but soon left and took up catering work instead. The relationship between Anthony and Elizabeth was far from the usual love-filled dreams of young couples. It was tense and tumultuous, with Anthony's controlling nature dominating, and Elizabeth fixated on staying with him and getting her drugs. In late 2015, Elizabeth told Anthony she was pregnant. Despite their young age, they decided to keep the baby. Anthony informed his mother, Ann Martinez, about Elizabeth's pregnancy. Although Ann disliked Elizabeth and their relationship, she offered to let them live with her. Shortly after their first child was born, Anthony proposed to Elizabeth, and she agreed immediately, despite the poor treatment she received from Anthony and his mother. Elizabeth soon became pregnant with their second child, Deshawn Martinez. However, Deshawn's birth was complicated. He had severe feeding issues within his first 2 weeks, which stunted his growth. The parents took him to the hospital, where he spent 10 days as doctors tried to help him retain food. Deshawn eventually started to grow, but always at a below-average rate. The doctors recommended a special diet for faster growth, but it was too expensive for Anthony and Elizabeth, especially since Elizabeth didn't use any birth control, resulting in their family growing to include 2 boys and 2 girls within 5 years. As the family grew, so did the financial strain and debt. Anthony, now around 25 years old, felt trapped by the responsibility of providing for a family of 5, which he saw as a losing battle. He decided to abandon all responsibility and turned his back on them completely. The family survived on food stamps and lived in extreme poverty. During this time, Elizabeth endured physical and psychological abuse from both Anthony and his mother, who blamed her drug addiction for the family's poverty. Anthony's life at home consisted of drinking and playing video games, with no regard for his family. When Elizabeth asked for more food for the family, Anthony accused her of mismanaging the household and insisted the food was enough. Elizabeth maintained that the food was insufficient, leading Anthony to monitor the food supply closely. After a few days, he noticed a significant decrease in food overnight, concluding that the boys were eating at night while he and Elizabeth slept, as the girls slept with them and were too young to sneak food. Like any heartless person devoid of fatherly feelings, Anthony decided to severely punish his sons for this behavior. When his mother found out, instead of stopping him, she grabbed a closet hanger and beat the boys as well. Elizabeth agreed with what their father and grandmother did, just to preserve the food at home. The older son, aged 7, and Deshaun, aged 6, didn't stop sneaking food at night. They were just kids, driven by their hunger. In response to their repeated actions, Anthony devised a punishment for his sons that was beyond cruel. In a display of utter disregard for fatherhood, he chose to imprison them in a tiny 21 by 25-inch closet near his video game setup, ensuring he could monitor them. The boys were locked up daily for a month, from 8 p.m. until noon the next day, about 16 hours each day. They were given an orange plastic piece to urinate in, as even bathroom breaks were forbidden. Elizabeth, despite her suffering at Anthony's hands, supported his cruel punishment. Sometimes, the grandmother attempted to sneak food to the boys, but Elizabeth stopped her. The boys endured this for about a month, deprived of movement and even schooling. On March 2nd, 2020, the grandmother opened the closet and found Deshaun unresponsive. She quickly took him out and called 911 to report her grandson's death, then informed Anthony, who called Elizabeth to tell her that Deshaun was dead. Arizona police quickly arrived at the family's Flagstaff home to investigate. The scene they found was horrific. The older boy, weighing only 28 pounds, 12.7 kilograms, was severely malnourished and in critical condition. He was taken to the hospital, where he spent 3 weeks under medical care. Deshaun, weighing just 18 pounds, 8.1 kilograms, was pronounced dead. Detective Zarneski began questioning the parents and grandmother about the cause of death. The parents claimed ignorance, but suggested Deshaun might have ingested a diet pill or caffeine, also pointing to his growth issues. Detective Zarneski observed that the boy looked skeletal, with skin tight over his bones, deep-set eyes with dark circles, and brittle hair. He also had abrasions and bruises on his body. These findings contradicted the parents' story and indicated deliberate starvation and abuse. Anthony and Elizabeth were taken in for questioning. Initially, they were nervous and evasive. When asked why their sons were malnourished while the daughters were healthy, Anthony said the boys' food was unhealthy and they were waiting for more food stamps for better food. Confronted with the bruises on Deshaun's body, Anthony had no explanation. Faced with forensic evidence of starvation and abuse, both parents broke down and confessed. Anthony tried to justify his actions, claiming poverty and that he gave the boys some oats and water while they were locked up to prevent them from stealing food at night. The grandmother admitted to spanking the boys using a wooden red hanger to stop them from stealing food, but denied involvement in the severe abuse. Anthony Martinez was charged with first-degree murder, child abuse, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. Also, Elizabeth Archibek faced the same charges. Ann Martinez, the grandmother, was also charged, but later had the murder charges dropped, leaving her facing child abuse and aggravated assault. During the trial, Anthony pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and apologized to his children in a letter, but remained silent in court. Elizabeth also pleaded guilty, expressing deep remorse and saying not a day passed without her mourning her son. Anthony was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Elizabeth received the same sentence. The charges against Ann Martinez were reduced, and she was convicted of child abuse. Elizabeth, speaking from prison, expressed sorrow over losing her son, but relief at being away from Anthony, knowing her remaining children would be cared for by a better family. However, she was unaware that according to the foster mother, her oldest son was severely traumatized, constantly asking about mealtimes and keeping a food box nearby, needing advanced psychological therapy. The older daughter did not speak for nearly 3 years, and the younger one had recurring dreams of saving her brothers from starvation. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next video.
Imagine a storm, not just of wind and rain, but one woven from betrayal, loss, and dark secrets. A life full of resilience shattered by the very person who once vowed to protect it. This is the story of Crystal Ann Serrata McDowell, a woman who fought against the odds, only to be ensnared by an unimaginable fate. Crystal Ann Serrata McDowell, born on October 26, 1979, in Harris County, Texas. From the start, life offered Crystal little mercy. Her parents, Pamela and Anthony, were deeply entangled in addiction, naming her after a drug that mirrored their struggles. Love and affection were rare, as her parents were consumed by their dependency, leaving little room for their daughter. At 11, Crystal faced her first deep loss when her father Anthony died from an overdose. Less than a month later, her mother Pamela followed the same path. From age 11 to 13, Crystal moved between friends and relatives, searching for a place to belong. Then came an event that would alter her life forever. At 13, Crystal's beauty began to blossom, but what many see as a gift became a source of tragedy for her. She was kidnapped by an attacker who confined her in a chicken coop, subjecting her to both physically and sexually assault. Despite the terror, Crystal fought her way to freedom. She escaped his grasp and afterward went to live with her uncle Jeff Walters. Everyone around her thought she will not be able to overcome this tragedy, yet Crystal has another opinion. Welcome to my channel. I truly appreciate your support and interaction. If you feel that the stories I share are worth following, you can hit subscribe. Thank you for being with me on this journey. Although such an experience could have shattered many young girls, Crystal was determined to rise above it. At her uncle's home, she studied tirelessly, day and night, eventually graduating from high school. Her striking beauty and natural communication skills led her to join ExpressJet Airlines, where she became a flight attendant. She traveled almost daily, meeting new faces and filling her life with a constant flow of people. Her tragic past, combined with the nature of her job, fostered a habit of staying in touch with her uncle and aunt. She called them almost every day, updating them on her travels and movements, a routine that brought her uncle immense joy and deepened their bond. However, Crystal's life of frequent travel also brought her into many relationships, with both men and women, creating a network of connections that shaped her life in different ways. Crystal's journey continued until her mid-20s, when she crossed paths with Stephen McDowell at an event at her uncle's home. Stephen Wayne McDowell, a shipping manager, and has one daughter from previous marriage named Krista. From their first meeting, Crystal believed she'd found the right person. She had always wanted a strong figure who could offer her the protection she craved, and Stephen seemed to fit that image at first glance, or so it seemed to her. Their relationship progressed swiftly, and by April 2007, Crystal and Stephen were married. It all happened fast and left some wondering about the whirlwind pace. But to all appearances, Crystal and Stephen seemed happy. Crystal was also expecting their first child. Stephen worked as a shipping manager, On the surface, he seemed like a strong man with a commanding presence, a sense of control that first drew Crystal to him. But behind his tough exterior and bald head, which gave him an air of authority, lay a fragile personality, less stable than anyone might guess. Crystal had seen enough in life to read between the lines. It didn't take long for her to realize that her relationship with Stephen was not destined to last. By early 2008, less than a year of their marriage, she told him she wanted a divorce, but Stephen's reaction terrified her. He immediately threatened to end his life if she left. In his eyes, she saw he meant it. She decided to stay, hoping things might change, that their life together might somehow find a better path. Life continued between them, with Crystal trying to shift Stephen's dependence on her, especially after their second child was born. Determined to give her children the life she never had. To achieve this, she knew she needed to earn more, so decided to leave as a flight attendant and training instructor after 15 years of continuous hard work, and she joined her uncle's real estate firm as an agent. For Crystal, it was a new challenge, but for Stephen, who always okay to stay still, it was risk. Yet as he always didn't show the support Crystal needed the most, her charm and natural communication skills made her one of the top sellers. But Stephen seemed to feed off her success, enjoying a lifestyle far beyond his own income level. Through this time, Crystal's relationships with other men didn't go unnoticed by Stephen. But what drove her to seek connection outside her marriage? Was she searching for someone to fill the emptiness Stephen left? Was she craving something he couldn't offer? Let's hear Crystal's answer through Stephen's own words.
She says that I'm not dominant enough in the bedroom, is what she says.
According to Stephen, Crystal never felt satisfied by him in bed, which made sense, as her bold, successful personality needed a partner who could make her feel her femininity in a way that matched her wild spirit. Instead, Stephen depended on her making her feel he was just another burden in her life. She spent years trying to help him, and what Stephen saw as whims were really her attempts to find the right person for her. 10 years had passed since Crystal and Stephen's relationship began, and now, at 38, she felt ready to meet someone who could truly be her partner for life. But what would she do with Stephen? He relied on her for everything, and his threats to end his life still lingered in her mind. After much thought, Crystal decided to tell him she could no longer continue this life, and that she wanted a divorce. As expected, Stephen began his usual threats that he would end his life if she left him. Yet this time, Crystal stood firm, making it clear she wouldn't yield to threats. But Stephen raised his warning to a terrifying level, telling her he wouldn't just kill himself, he would also take their children with him. Crystal understood well that breaking free from Stephen wouldn't be simple for herself or her children. She offered to leave him the house they shared, while she would move back to her old house in Baytown once remodeling were complete, hoping this would give him some sense of stability, that her support wouldn't disappear entirely. On February 2017, the divorce proceedings began, but it would take at least 6 months for her old house to be ready. In the meantime, she continued living under the same roof with Stephen. Everyone knew about the divorce, but in Stephen's mind, he couldn't accept it. He believed their marriage was still intact, that this was just a temporary phase. He convinced himself that no matter what Crystal's so-called whims might be, she would ultimately stay with him. For everyone around them, the news of Crystal's divorce was a little bit confusing, something that didn't seem to add up. Crystal, who never shared the real reasons behind her decision to leave Stephen, and on the other side, Stephen wouldn't dare admit he couldn't meet her needs in their relationship. But one thing was obvious to everyone. Stephen had been living beyond his means, spending lavishly from the money Crystal worked hard to earn. Friends and family assumed this was the reason behind the split. By June 2017, the divorce was finalized, yet Crystal remained in the house with Stephen. Later that month, Crystal decided to remake her grandmother's ring. She went to a jewelry store in Baytown, where her attention was immediately drawn to the lively energy of Paul Hargrave. She recognized him from the advertisements he created for his own jewelry. Paul noticed Crystal, too, feeling an instant attraction. Breaking from his usual routine, he chose to serve her personally. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. Paul had a strong, calm presence, with a voice that conveyed control and confidence. exactly the qualities Crystal had always wanted in a partner. Their connection quickly deepened into something far more personal than a customer-seller exchange. Each time they met, Crystal felt she was finally with the man of her dreams. With Paul in her life, Crystal was happier than she'd been in years. Her friends noticed the change. Her smile returned. Even her Facebook posts hinted at new love. But one thing held her back from announcing her relationship with Paul. It was him, Stephen. Though their marriage was over, Crystal knew Stephen would never accept it. She feared that sharing news of her relationship with Paul Hargrave might push Stephen to carry out his threats to harm himself, or even their children, especially after his recent attempts to rekindle their relationship. When she refused, he'd taken their children and vanished for a few days. During this time, Crystal had called the police, but when Stephen returned home, so she chose to drop the charges for the children's sake. But the news of Crystal and Paul's relationship had already reached Stephen. There was no way to hide it from him. He followed her every move. In his mind, he still believed he had a chance, that he could win her back somehow. But what could he do? Stephen remembered the cruise trip he and Crystal had planned with their family in the coming summer. He saw it as the perfect moment to propose to her again, to try to rekindle what they once had. He bought himself a white suit, picked out a dress for her, and began preparing the surprise, a happy occasion for everyone, or so he imagined. Stephen called his daughter, Krista, and shared his plan to propose to Crystal again. Although he seemed excited, Krista told him it was a terrible idea and that the divorce was for the best. She urged him to reconsider, knowing this attempt would only bring him further pain and rejection. Despite feeling neglected by her father throughout her life, Krista wanted to be a good daughter. She tried to shield him from making a choice that could break him down even more, hoping he'd let go of the idea for his own sake. Meanwhile, Crystal and Paul were basking in the joy of their new relationship. For Crystal, each day with Paul brought double the happiness as he continued to show her that he was indeed the right person for her. When the time came for the cruise, Crystal, who was covering the trip's expenses, invited Paul along. But there was one problem. Stephen would be there too. Paul felt uneasy about joining them on such a trip, especially with her former husband present. He knew Crystal and Stephen still lived under the same roof, which made him even more uncomfortable. Crystal decided to ask Stephen not to come on the trip, explaining that Paul would be joining and wouldn't feel comfortable with him there. At that moment, Stephen's world crumbled. Everything he had clung to about their relationship now seemed shattered, but in an unexpected turn, he didn't argue or show anger. He simply accepted her request. His calm compliance felt wrong to Crystal. This was not the reaction she had expected, but she brushed aside her unease, choosing to focus on her happiness with Paul. Now the situation has settled in a way that feels almost too perfect. The ex-husband has seemingly accepted the divorce and stepped aside, allowing Crystal to move on with her new love. Her family believes Stephen has quietly and gracefully withdrawn, and even Krista thinks her father backed out of the family trip on his own. Everything seems calm, a calmness that Crystal is not used to, but this eerie calm is soon shattered by news that sends shockwaves through Texas and far beyond. Hurricane Harvey, a monstrous storm that began in Indonesia, is barreling toward Texas with terrifying speed. The news channels fill the airwaves with grim updates, tracking its every movement. Authorities brace for the worst. Panic spreads like wildfire as people rush to stock up on food and supplies, desperately trying to secure some form of protection for their families. The reports warn that the hurricane will rage for days. For Crystal, who has always met challenges head-on, this threat seems no different. Fear doesn't come easily to her. She hears that the hurricane is expected to strike on August 26th, but for now, she goes about her life as usual. On August 24th, the clouds roll in thick and heavy, casting a dark shroud over the day as storm bells toll across the city. Crystal sends Paul a casual message, noting that the sky is a bit cloudy, but nothing alarming. She reassures him she'll take the kids if they ask to go out, but for now, she isn't concerned. That evening, after spending time with her children, Crystal tells Stephen as he stands in front of his room on the second floor that she won't be spending the night at home. She expects him to look after the children in her absence. Stephen watches her, knowing exactly where she's going and whom she'll be with. That night, Crystal goes to Paul's house. They spend the night together, wrapped in the comfort of their new relationship. But when dawn breaks on August 25th, the sky is ominous, dark clouds, swelling with the promise of the storm to come. Crystal feels an urge to be with her children. She leaves Paul's house at first light, sending Stephen a message as she drives. She asks if they have enough water at the house, or if she should pick up more supplies on her way. That message would be the last anyone would ever receive from her. After that, Crystal vanished. No one heard from her. No one saw her, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. As the hours crawl by, Stephen remains unaware of her fate, yet he didn't take any action about it. Paul assumes she returned safely to her house, but someone begins to sense that something is terribly wrong. Uncle Jeff Walters hasn't received a single call or message from Crystal, a strange and troubling silence. His gut tells him something is off. Jeff tries her phone, but it's turned off. Panic rising, he contacts Stephen, who tells him the only message he received from her was at 7 that morning. Paul too begins to worry when he hears Crystal's phone is off. He reaches out to everyone he can think of, family, friends, anyone who might have heard from her, but no one has seen or spoken to Crystal. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jeff wastes no time. He contacts the police, reporting his niece missing.
Chambers County Sheriff's Office.
It's my niece.
Okay, your niece.
No one can get a hold of her. No one has heard from her.
Despite the fact that every available resource in the state is being channeled to prepare for the hurricane, the police take immediate action to investigate Crystal's disappearance. The storm hasn't hit yet, and no one suspects that the hurricane itself is responsible. But the question remains, what happened to Crystal? Is someone responsible for this inexplicable disappearance? Could it be her husband, Stephen Wayne McDowell, the man who has stood in the shadows since their split, or her lover Paul Hargrave, the man she spent her final night with? And then there's her Uncle Jeff, who reported her missing just hours after her disappearance, his emotions running high. Could he be hiding something sinister behind his concern? Hurricane Harvey hit Texas with merciless force on August 26, 2006, leaving countless homes shattered or completely erased. Yet amid the devastation, every officer reported for duty, showing a courage that defied the chaos around them. Sheriff Hawthorne took on Crystal's case with a chilling certainty. From day one, he knew her disappearance traced back to one of 3 people. But which one? His team plunged into Crystal's world, uncovering a vast web of relationships, acquaintances, and connections, more than they'd expected. But how could they sift through this maze? Should they eliminate the unlikely leads, or zero in directly on the 3 people closest to her? The team chose the latter. It would be harder, but they wanted to find the truth, no matter the cost. Quickly, the investigation narrowed its gaze, returning to the ex-husband, the lover, and the uncle, each harboring a shadow of suspicion. Tensions ran high among the investigators as they debated which of the 3 seemed most capable of causing Crystal's disappearance. Uncle Jeff was relentless. Grief-stricken, he pushed for answers, demanding swift action. Unsettled by the official pace, Jeff even hired a private investigator and gathered friends to search Crystal's house himself, a reckless move that destroyed potential evidence and threw the investigation into further disarray. Meanwhile, the team wrestled with one vital question. What could drive one of these 3 to do the unthinkable? As they probed deeper into Uncle Jeff's actions, it became clear that despite his blunders, his love for Crystal was genuine. His intentions sprang from fear that something unspeakable had happened to her. On another front, the investigation into Paul Hargrave grew intense. Uncle Jeff voiced unease about Paul's controlling demeanor. The police's suspicions deepened when Paul provided a recording from his home security system to the media rather than directly to the police. Yet the footage was clean, showing that Crystal left Paul's home alive. Then there was Stephen, the husband who had refused to let go. Every new revelation about Stephen painted a darkening picture of the struggles between him and Crystal. They discovered she'd been involved with other men during their marriage, yet he'd clung to her all the same. The investigators' suspicions of Stephen grew sharper each day, but still, no concrete evidence tied him to Crystal's disappearance. The police decided to administer lie detector tests to both Stephen and Paul, and in a stunning twist, both men failed. The team's confusion only deepened as they grasped for answers, while the days slipped by. With each passing hour, The likelihood of finding Crystal alive grew fainter. Then came a break that no one expected. Uncle Jeff's relentless search had finally led somewhere. A participant in the search effort spotted a Mercedes matching the description of Crystal's car, parked in an unusual spot at a Motel 6.
Black car right here, this Mercedes. 2 people got out of it, and it doesn't belong to them.
He took a photo of the car and sent it to the search team, and suddenly, the investigators had their first real lead. Heavy rains continued to pound Texas, but the team wouldn't let the floodwaters stop them. They took an airboat to the location of the car, navigating the submerged roads with grim determination. When they reached the car, they found it unlocked, with the keys sitting plainly on the dashboard, a silent invitation, saying to any passerby, "Come and steal me." It was clear to the police. Whoever left that car there wanted it to be taken. A question now looms in the minds of the investigators. Who parked Crystal's car there? Who knows where she is? The police immediately turned to the motel's cameras and the surrounding roads, hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver. But nature seems to conspire against them. Hurricane Harvey's relentless rain and dark clouds obscure every detail. The driver is an anonymous shadow shrouded in the storm. Yet the investigators refuse to give up. They continue combing through footage determined to find a clue that will reveal Crystal's driver. And then, luck strikes. Amid the blurry recordings, they spot a distinct blue Mustang pulling into a Shell gas station on the day Crystal disappeared. It's more than the color that stands out. They recognize the car as Stephen's Crystal's ex-husband. But why was he there that day? Why is he wandering near the motel where Crystal's car was found, although he mentioned that, in this day, he only went shopping in Walmart? The footage sends a chill down their spines. Stephen gets out of the Mustang, strides toward the motel parking lot, as though inspecting something, before returning to his car. He leaves the gas station without even filling up. The police know this isn't a coincidence. Stephen had come to that lot for a purpose. He had planted Crystal's car there. But a question remains. If he abandoned her car at the motel, how did he get home? Then the answer becomes disturbingly clear, a detail Stephen himself let slip. He mentioned he had shopped at Walmart that day. The investigators review the Walmart footage and find a damning scene. Stephen is seen purchasing a bike. Moments later, the camera captures him riding that bike home. The evidence builds a terrifying picture, but the police know they need more than context to make the case ironclad. They need a confession. They summon Stephen for questioning. Thus begins a mental standoff between him and the investigators. Cold, unwavering Stephen denies everything. He dismisses the footage, the evidence, the suspicions, as meaningless. He knows nothing about Crystal's disappearance, he insists. The police push harder. They strike a nerve. Working with Child Protective Services, they revoke Stephen's custody of his children, transferring them to their Aunt Cindy. The children are his only attachment, and the police deliver their ultimatum. If he doesn't come clean, he'll lose them forever. The pressure mounts, and Stephen begins to falter, but he still isn't ready to confess. Instead, he makes a chilling demand. Stephen asks to be allowed one last night at home, promising he'll tell them everything in the morning, on one condition. In exchange for leading them to Crystal's body, the state must agree to remove the death penalty from the table. This demand is a silent admission. By Texas law, first-degree murder carries a death sentence. Stephen's request is his way of telling them he knows Crystal's fate. The police reluctantly agree, granting Stephen one last night in his home. They warn him any misstep means he'll never see his children again. He arrives home around 1 a.m. and immediately calls his daughter Krista, who works late at a bar. He urges her to come see him, saying she might not get another chance. Krista senses something is terribly wrong, but she drives to his house 2.5 hours away. When she arrives, Stephen's appearance shocks her. Gaunt, haunted, he barely resembles the father she remembers. He tells her the police think he's responsible for Crystal's disappearance, but insists he's innocent. Krista tries to reassure him, tells him she believes him, but Stephen keeps talking. His voice distant as he lays out his finances, asks her to look after her siblings. Krista grows uneasy. His words sound more like a final farewell than an innocent man's plea. She tries again to calm him, to tell him she knows he couldn't be involved in Crystal's disappearance. But then he looks at her, his face pale and hollow, his voice trembling. He tells her the police promise to spare him the death penalty if he shows them where Crystal's body is. Her blood runs cold. "You don't know where her body is, do you?" she asks, voice shaking. "What if I did?" he replies. In that instant, Krista crumples to the floor as the horrifying truth crashes over her. She realizes her father is Crystal's killer. Tears flood her eyes as she collapses, sobbing under the weight of his confession. Just hours after Krista's meeting with her father, the police arrive at Stephen's house. This time, he breaks. He confesses that, on the morning of August 25th, after Crystal returned home, they argued. She had mentioned again to him that he could not satisfy her in bed. For Stephen, it was the ultimate insult. In a blind rage, he attacked her from behind, choking the life from her as she begged him to stop telling him he was scaring her. Her voice faded to silence as he strangled her. The investigator listened closely as Stephen recounted every horrifying detail of that fateful day. After 15 days of searching, this was the moment they had been preparing for. The confession was on record, and now Stephen was expected to lead them to Crystal's body. Weak and detached, as if drifting between worlds, Stephen guided the investigators to a dense wooded area off an access road not far from his home. As they approached the site, anxiety gripped them. The woods had been ravaged by Hurricane Harvey, and there was a terrifying possibility that Crystal's remains might have been disturbed or even washed away. Yet as they reached the spot, they found Crystal's body untouched, preserved, as though waiting for justice. With this discovery, Stephen was formally arrested and taken to Chambers County Jail, where he would await his day in court. Stephen spent 2 years behind bars until his trial began in June 2019. The proceedings stretched over 5 tense days as witness after witness took the stand. Stephen's lawyers argued that his actions were a crime of sudden passion, claiming he'd strangled Crystal in a moment of passion that went terribly wrong. A legal defense under Texas law that could potentially reduce his sentence to a mere 2 years. But the judge listened to every word from both sides, weighing the cold brutality of the act. After 5 days, the jury reached a verdict in just 3.5 hours. Stephen McDowell was sentenced to 50 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2042. After the trial, a sense of relief settled over everyone, a grim satisfaction that justice had been served. But one question lingered heavy in the air. What would become of Crystal and Stephen's children? They were now parentless, orphaned by the same dark fate that had once cast its shadow over their mother's life. The children were placed in the care of their Aunt Cindy, who took on the difficult task of guiding them through the truth. Gently, but with unflinching honesty, she told them that their mother had gone to heaven and that their father had been the one to take her soul. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next video.